All right, so, would you like to start on the end? You have about 5 minutes. Go ahead.
I'm Frank Potter, retired biology botany faculty member. Visiting out in Kansas. Retired back here because of the wineries, I believe. And I've been teaching involved in environmental issues for 30 or 40 years, going back. There's religious things, if you have any questions, I'm here as a Unitarian. And I do, if anyone's interested, I have some cards I brought to find out what Unitarians are. And I do have a bunch of information if we can afford good questions about the importance of religion in terms of the environment and climate in particular, keeping in mind that the majority of people around the world, vast majority are involved in some form of religion. So it's a very powerful instrument to help address some of the problems.
My name is Gary Brin. I'm a pastor in the United Church of Christ, and I actually serve the Park Church, which is the big Silver Dome church downtown. I also have a second hat, which is I'm a member of the Elmira City Council, represent the northern part of the city on the city council. I come to this, the United Church of Christ is a progressive Protestant denomination. So things like environmental justice matter to us anyways. This particular congregation is covenanted as a climate justice church. But for me personally, I come at it from a theological point of view, which is very different than that of many more traditional Christians, which is to say that much of the theology is based on the idea of human exceptionalism, that humans are somehow different and of a different ordering category than the rest of creation. And I don't come from that perspective at all as a constructive theologian, and as someone who actually, knows a little bit of science. I know that we are evolved bipedal primates and not that much different than the rest of the animals. So for me, my commitment to justice is about my commitment to all of creation as being my sisters and brothers in every sense of the word. Every living thing on this planet is amazing and miraculous from my point of view. We at the church have done a number of things to improve our carbon footprint, including moving our sanctuary and fellowship hall over to heat pumps. That was a rather daunting task. The building is 150 years old this year. It is a city block long, and it is 4 stories tall. So you can imagine how much effort it takes to try to bring that into, we're nowhere near net zero, but we're working on that path. And again, when we get to the questions, I'd be happy to answer any you may have.
I'm Paul Sullivan. I'm the retired executive director of the Jewish Center and Federation of the Twin Tiers. I'm also ordained as a Maggid, a Jewish storyteller and spiritual educator. And I'm back in school now, studying for a graduate certificate in environmental spirituality at Hartford International University. I wanted to mention, since some of you may be considering divinity school later on, that beginning next year, they will be offering eco-spirituality as a concentration for a Master of Arts in Interreligious Studies or a Master of Arts in chaplaincy. And the Interreligious Studies MA can be articulated in seminary training at Boston University. In the Jewish world, well, research shows that American Jews are more committed to climate action than any other ethnic or religious group in the country. And I have to say that what we actually do is not that good. Particularly on climate justice, I think we lag, even though we place a very high priority on justice. Now, you guys are not going to remember the civil rights movement of the 1960s, but in the Freedom Summer of 1964, which is organized by Black civil rights organizations in the South. It was a voter registration drive in Mississippi. The organizers wanted about 100 white volunteers from the North. They got 1,000, and 500 of them were Jewish. Okay. Based on the percentage of Jewish population, there should have been about a dozen of them. But it's significant that they were there as individuals and not because Jewish leadership encouraged them to participate. And that's pretty much the way it is with climate right now. All the major Jewish organizations say the right things about climate, but that's all they do. There are, on the other hand, many smaller organizations that are much more active. And one in particular, Dianu, works on climate justice. And the point they make, which you can also draw from the 1964 experience, is that the leadership needs to come from the people affected, not from outsiders of goodwill. So they tell us that we cannot prescribe for others what climate justice would be for them. We have to wait for them to tell us what they want us to do. And I think that's an important moral principle because frankly, our prescribing for others what they should want is part of the problem.
Colonialism.
Yes, yes. Judaism, organized Judaism, is not as strong in the environment as it could be. And I think part of the reason for that is that Judaism accidentally, over centuries, it's estranged itself from nature. And the root of that, now the biggest causes are probably urbanization, things like that. But the root of it actually is in the book of Genesis, where it says that Esau was a man of the field, a hunter, but Jacob was a plain man who dwelt in tents, plural. And the question comes up, why did he do more than one tent? Okay, well, the rabbis put their heads to this and gave the answer pretty much that any Hebrew school teacher would make up today, which is one tent to sleep in and another tent to study. And they took it much farther than that, beginning about the 6th century, and said that he studied in certain ancient academies, the Academy of Shem and the Academy of Ezer. Shem was the son of Noah. That did not exist. And what he could have studied in them is impossible to answer because none of our holy texts have been written yet. Okay, this is totally made up. The plain sense of dwelt in tents was that he was a shepherd because shepherds camped out with their flocks for weeks at a time. And there's a passage in chapter 4 of Genesis that makes that completely clear. Okay, that idea was pointed out in the 12th century. But by the 14th century, there was a resurgence of this study business that made him into a yeshiva bar, a pale, emaciated guy who studies the Talmud 16 hours a day and never sees the sun, never mind goes outdoors and enjoys nature. And that, I think, has contributed to an idea that is true, authentic Judaism. Whereas biblical Judaism, well, first of all, there's a tremendous amount of law in the Torah that is about agriculture and animal husbandry. Okay, and a big part of the plot line in the book of Genesis is about raising animals. If you look at biblical Judaism, it is intimately connected with nature. And the idea that something else is real Judaism is absolutely impossible for me to understand. So I think part of our corrective needs to be getting ourselves back in touch with nature. Now, I said there are lots of small Jewish or environmental organizations. And some of them have actually started farms to teach young Jews about agriculture. And I think we need more of that, but in our basic teaching of what Judaism is about, we need to be teaching the parts of scripture that make us kind of uncomfortable, like how to slaughter animals. Not because we want everybody to slaughter animals, but because it's a part of our history and it indicates how we relate to the world. Christianity, if I may,
Excuse
is
me, sir.
also at a little bit of danger of estranging itself from nature.
Excuse
and the
me, sir.
environment.
It's been 5 minutes. Can we
Because
move
of,
on to
I
the
think, a
next?
misreading of the book of Genesis that prefers chapter 1, where it says, master the earth and subdue it, over chapter 2, that says God placed the human in the Garden of Eden to till it and to tend it, which implies some stewardship. And also because some Christian denominations, not my colleague, those of my colleagues here, are so focused on the hereafter that nothing in the here and now really matters.
Is it my turn?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's your turn.
If you'll excuse me, it's been a really busy day. It'll be easier for me if I just kind of read off my prepared script. So I hope you forgive me doing that. I took this from a slightly different angle. First of all, my name is Reverend Lynn Rubier Capron, and I am the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Elmira on West Clinton Street. So that's on the other side of town. It's good to see you today. Thank you for being here. I'm going to come at it from a New Testament perspective. And I began, what popped into my head as I was thinking about speaking to you was a verse from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, where Jesus says, by their fruits, you will know them. By their fruits, you will know them. In other words, if they're always collecting drama around them, that tells you something, right? That's kind of the idea. Jesus is speaking from the wisdom tradition when he says that. And the wisdom tradition is represented in scripture with books like, raise your hand just real quick if you've ever heard of these words, the Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and in the New Testament, the book of James. Okay, so those are all what we call wisdom tradition books, okay? And as we see from the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus often speaks from the wisdom tradition. It just kind of pops up in what he does. The question that wisdom asks and answers is, given what we know about God, and given what is happening right now in the world, how do we live? That's the wisdom question. And the first thing it teaches is to remember that our own personal perspective is not the only one. So let's see how God's teachings and other people's perspectives can impact our lifestyle, our decisions, and our way of life. And so how did they say that in the old days? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay, puts you in the right attitude where you're not the boss of everything. From there, as Jesus said, wisdom gives you a tool for applying God's values to matters that may be unprecedented. That would be the case for our environmental concerns, right? When the ancients wrote about naming animals in the book of Genesis, or picking apples from a tree, no one could have envisioned the scientific revolution that completely flipped the human relationship with the created order. Let me ask you this question. How many of you, after walking down the street, ever got within a couple feet of a deer? With a rack on its head, with its nostrils flaring, stamping its foot. I'm 4'9" tall. Okay, my body has an ab reaction to that. Okay, but most of us live very far from those moments. That's kind of what I'm talking about. No one could have foreseen the result and advances of grain production in such a way that the human population has completely overwhelmed the planet, right? That was a major shift and a recent shift in human history. But Jesus taught that if our approach to nature has resulted in the destruction of our own planet, we can easily see that by their fruits you will know them. We need to change. So that's kind of how we go about it in our congregation. In a minute, I'm going to share some of the practical things that we do in our congregation to try to begin to work on this. And we're not as far along as your church. They're a lot more in tune with the peace and justice into things than we are, but we're making progress. But first of all, I just want to find out how many of you are from some kind of religious background? Okay. And how many of your houses of worship currently acknowledge some kind of need to address environmental concerns? A lot fewer hands. Okay, but some, that's good. How many of you are interested in being part of the efforts in your own house of worship to change your congregation's relationship to the created order? Okay, let's hope we can change that. Sounds like we have a work out for us. This is interesting. So here are some of the things that we're doing in our church that are just practical. I will say the best way to make these kind of changes in our church is to find the people that are interested and to lean into those and to lean into them, to empower them to do the things that they can do. So we of course change our bulbs, our LED bulbs and all interior and exterior lights. We've established a garden of milkweeds for monarch butterflies. We've switched to low flow toilets, increasing the number of and making more visible recycled containers. We actually take our recycling very seriously. I printed this up on old paper. Let's see what else. We are doing some preliminary discussions about installing solar panels. We're seriously looking into that. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, we do talk some about land acknowledgements in the church. We don't do it every time we gather, but we have been doing some of it. Now we have a rummage sale every year, and it's really interesting. We have a couple women that organize that rummage sale, and they have realized that one of their core values is making sure that we avoid waste and we make the most of the material goods that we have. So this year, instead of just carting all the stuff that we didn't sell off to Goodwill, she took the time to find, okay, who really needs the things that we didn't sell and making sure that they get where they belong. This is the kind of thing that you can do.
Excuse me, Pastor.
okay.
Are you ready to wrap it up and move on to questions?
All right.
All right.
There we go.
Does anybody have any specific questions that they would like to ask? Okay. No. Then I will ask you guys a question. So the first question is, in what ways can environmental perspectives invigorate religion, sorry. Invigorate religion, my bad. So in what ways can environmental perspectives invigorate religion? So any one of you are welcome to start with your perspective.
One of the things we are seeing is that when people think that Judaism doesn't address the concerns that are really on their minds, and environment is a very big one, they tend to lose interest in Judaism and look elsewhere for the leadership. And this is not good for our institutions. It's not good for our identity. In the fall, I taught an adult class on Judaism and the environment. And while the enrollment wasn't huge, the activism that came from it is considerable.
I think it expands our understanding of who God is and of who we are. I mean, you can't study scripture without seeing that God's love for and covenant with is all creation. I mean, you even see it in the New Testament, you know, where Paul is trying to figure some stuff out for the community in Rome, and he says all creation groans, and you know, I mean, this concept that we are tied to the rest of creation and that all of it is an expression of God's love. You really have to dig into that as you look at what we've done to the planet, and I think it expands our concept of who we are and who God is.
I'm gonna jump in, but I'm also gonna make a pitch. Since Paul made a pitch for his school, I'll make a pitch for mine. I went to this little hippy dippy place in Cambridge, Massachusetts, called Harvard Divinity, and I got there from a public university in the city of New York. So don't imagine that you can't get there. If you are interested in studying theology or just how we make meaning of the world, please give it some thought. A lot of folks come through our program at Harvard and end up in nonprofits or governmental work. You don't have to become a clergy person. So that's
one rabbi who went to Harvard.
One of my roommates is a rabbi now. So he did 2 years of Harvard Divinity and 5 years of rabbinic school. God bless him.
No, Jeremy never went to rabbinic school. It's otherwise all for independent study.
So how does it reinvigorate? How does it invigorate religion? And I think I have to add to the story of Park Church, which is a unique church in a lot of ways. Park Church actually broke with Lynn's church very long time ago. We've reconciled.
Be nice now.
Broke with Lynn's church over the abolition of slavery. And if you've been to Wisner Park or driven through town, you probably have heard the name Thomas K. Beecher. He was the pastor of the Park Church for 50 years, brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, brother of other great abolitionist Beechers. He preached practical Christianity. And that really is our mantra to this day. We don't say creeds. We don't care what you believe. We care what you do. We say every Sunday, we're not interested in the abstract things you think. We're interested in the practical things you do. So the congregation is very much about this world. We're not oriented towards heaven. We're oriented, in some ways, we're very much like Judaism. We're focused on orthopraxis, good practice, rather than orthodoxy, correct belief. So everything about our daily life is invigorated by the justice causes we care about. Climate justice is one of them. There are others, LGBTQIA plus justice, housing justice, racial justice, and gender justice are all part of the matrix for us, and all things we work on a regular basis.
Well, one of the big things I say that all religions need to do, formal religions, and that I'm going to emphasize for being a university college here, that education. I've looked up a bunch of statistics on religious groups and their commitment and really understanding the problem. And we find that, and ask the question, do the different religions, how do they feel about climate change? And latest figures I got, just to give you an idea, 60% of Christians, okay, we need to do something maybe. 79% of the other major religions, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindus, Muslim, all think it's a bigger problem. And so and then I run down the whole list of information, I realize one of the big failures is that we're not, that the different religious groups educating people enough of the problems. It'd be a really serious, considered a serious problem we have to address. For instance, Christian, that's only 45%. Non-Christian, non-religious people, atheists, agnostics, that's up at 90%. You realize that we have to do something. And first degree, both resilient and slowing down what we're using and adjusting to it. So I think one of the biggest things right now in the religious institutions we need to work on is really educating our groups. Try to get more serious about the problem.
All right, sounds good. Does anybody have any more questions concerning that specific topic? Go ahead.
Comment. They've heard of the movie On the Beach. As your great grandparents. Or me, if you prefer. It was about the nuclear war trying to happen. The country's being destroyed. Or we're dying. Which is, nice way to start. But the thing is that at the end of the movie, there's a beach. The movie is called On the Beach. At the end of the movie, there's a beach. And there's a big banner, and it says, "There is still time for it." And I compare that to climate change and the planet. I passionately believe there's still time. It's easier to you folks. I was in the fight for Vietnam protest movement, but I got grandkids. And I'm still pushing with 80 years old. I have to live a long time. I have a lot of people left in Illinois. So I can only be in this for a while, but passionately and be passionate because it's your plan. It's absolutely looking at it, regardless of what we're doing. But
To just quickly add,
You're
because
fine.
I think we all recognize the intersectionality of these justice issues. So for example, I mentioned I represent the northernmost district in the city of Elmira on the council. And that includes a lot of the historically redlined zones in the city of Elmira. So areas where people of color were allowed to live. Because let's be clear, with the banking system and the mortgage system and the federal government, there was a decision to intentionally segregate people racially coming out of the Second World War, certainly before that, really bad during the Second World War. So there is, for example, under cooperative extension right now, there's a planning grant called Elmira Urban Green Equity, and I'm on the advisory committee for that group. And it's about creating green space in impoverished census tracts. Impoverished census tracts almost always in any city means redlined neighborhoods. So we always have to remember that these justice issues are always entangled with one another. If they're going to put a toxic site anywhere in an area, they're going to put it where people of color live, where poor people live, every single time. So it's not just the environmental justice issue, which is a huge issue. It's that it's entangled with all these other issues: access to medical care, food deserts,
clean water.
you know, where there are whole clean water, whole neighborhoods where you can't go buy fresh food. Your only food is a 7-Eleven or a Dollar General. That's, you know, how can you raise kids eating healthy if all you have available to you is processed food? So.
No, I think that was a really good point to bring up. Did any of you guys also want to build off of that as well? Or just move on to the next question?
When I was listening to you, Gary, it is impoverished, usually locations of color, people of color. But I even think that Chemung County, being one of the most wealthy counties in the state, I think of our dump, our huge dump over here, and how they're always wanting to expand it because they figure the people here, and that I went to a county meeting one time, and I said that we have such poor self-esteem that the only thing we see ourselves of value is to be home to a dump. Wow. So, and we live it here.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you young people are from other areas, if you think about it in your own home areas.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. So how do you think people's treatment of the environments mimics their relationship with God? Any of you are welcome to start.
Well, I think I'll start with that because I'm the only female on the panel. I think that there's a lot about traditional religious practices that is disembodied. And I think the female perspective, especially theologically, if you study feminist theology, you will see that what we do is we get in touch with our body in feminist theological traditions, and we notice how God shows up in embodied ways. And so I think that there's a doorway there.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of Unitarians, one thing about Unitarians, we're a hodgepodge of individuals, beliefs, and we're spiritualists, atheists, agnostics, Christians, etc. But the important thing, I think, with the Unitarians, it's always been, is that we have our principles, 7 principles. Well, they added an 8th one on social justice. 7 ones we traditionally use. And the important thing there is one of the most important aspects is that Seventh one, respect for the interdependency web of all existence in which we are a part. In other words, we are a part of natural system. And one nice thing about Unitarians, I'll put a plug in where I say it's first-centered. And a bottom-up type of, you don't want to be part of the national or regional councils, you don't have to. And there are advantages, but we don't have to be. We're not committed, it's not a formal type of thing. But in terms of the environment, interaction, and doing with the environment, committed no matter what our religious or philosophical beliefs are, being part of the web of life.
You know, there's an old joke that United Church of Christ, we go by UCC, and sometimes folks say it really means Unitarians considering Christ. And if you knew our personality as a denomination, you totally get that, because we've divested from fossil fuels. We've been open and affirming, welcoming the LGBTQ community for many years. We ordained our first woman in 1853. And there are folks who still don't ordain women. So we've always been kind of on that cutting edge. One of the interesting things is that we are in another way very much like the Unitarian Universalist Church, our denomination, which is we don't say creeds, and we don't have a litmus test of a creed to be a member or to be part of our community. And there are quite a few members of our congregation who are gladly atheist. I like to think of us as culturally Christian, but we don't really test those things. We come out of that tradition and operate in that tradition. So asking how does environmental justice, climate justice engage people's relationship with God is kind of an interesting question, right? Because not all of our folks understand their relationship with holy mystery as being a relationship with a old white guy in the sky who, let's be clear, is a perpetrator of domestic violence. And that's not the frame that any of the folks in our pews would ever use. They would say, I believe, many of them, that their relationship with God is often their experience of creation, their experience of nature, their experience of Tanglewood or sailing or at the lake.
Oh, can I ask you a question?
Of course you can.
Is this the first time you guys have heard clergy disagree about who God is? Raise your hand if it is. I'm just really curious. Have you ever heard clergy arguing about who God is before? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to know.
Okay. So I know that, oh, go ahead.
I personally am inclined toward Reconstructionist Judaism, whose founder held that God is basically all the forces of nature. And the more you believe specifically about God, the more likely it is that you're wrong. Like Gary's church, except that it's more fundamental to us. We are way more concerned with how you live than what you believe, to the point where no one in a synagogue will ever ask what you believe.
Do any of you have anything else to add on that topic? We'll move on to the next question. Oh, go ahead.
What scriptures or doctrines would you guys think influence your views on the environment or other social problems?
I can answer that quickly because it's really simple. I have a canon within the canon. So within the canon of the scriptural tradition, I have two texts that are totally formative to me. Micah 6:8, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. And then Matthew 25, the story of the shepherd sorting the sheep and the goats. Goats totally get a raw deal there, for the record.
It's not the only place in
yeah, But the takeaway from that is what you have done to the least of these, you have done also unto me. So everything that I operate comes out of those two cortex.
For me, it's chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus, which is generally called Holiness Code, because it says so often that it do thus and so, because I, your God, am holy. And it's the part that teaches us things like, you shall love your neighbor and stranger as yourself. That's actually commanded 36 times in the Torah, but that's the place that's cited. Do not place a stumbling block before the blind. Do not curse the deaf. I once taught a deaf seventh grader who replied to that if people gossip about her behind her back, she always finds out anyway. Because seventh grade girls share everything. And it's all concerned with what to do, not what to think.
And I already addressed the questions by talking about the wisdom tradition.
I'm going to disagree and say that the wisdom tradition actually begins in the book of Genesis.
Amen. You're right. I only had 5 minutes, dude. Come on.
You can elaborate now if you would like.
No, just that basic concept that the wisdom tradition is what do we do now given what we have in front of us?
Would you like to share also?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think in terms of all the people. We really do not follow the Bible as such. In the Unitarian group. Universalists, I'm not. We are called the Unitarian Universalists, if you want to know. That was an economic combination. And there's a lot of differences. I would equate Unitarian with closer to Quaker very much. So we're not really tied to a scripture as such.
Is there something different that you follow in your church that
Well, we have basically our 7 principles.
is one of your principles tied to environment specifically that you would like to
We
share?
have a life, that's the 7th one.
Okay.
And some of the others, I have them right here. The other important thing along the same line is that we have the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That I think are very important. Everyone is important and everyone should be respected.
I want to step out of the Abrahamic tradition for just a moment and point out that you've got 2 Christians and you're a Unitarian here, and there are voices that are not at this table that are equally valid and important in the conversation about environmental justice. I am also very much influenced by Buddhism. It has a lot of impact on my own life. I have a tattoo of a line from Luke, and I have a tattoo of the Heart Sutra. And I want to go to the Heart Sutra, which is often referred to as the sutra that teaches us emptiness, but emptiness is a bad Western word for a concept that doesn't fit into Western words. And often Thich Nhat Hanh, the late great Zen master, would instead talk about interbeing, that you enter with other things in existence. You are empty of anything that is just you. And if you are connected with all other beings, all of creation, you are interconnected with everything. How can you be anything but compassionate and just? Because those things are you and you are those things. So there are other traditions that have very powerful, important things to say. Obviously, we're missing the voice of indigenous peoples. Those traditions have a lot still to teach us.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing that. And then I just want to ask, did anyone else have another question to share? You already asked a lot of good questions. Go ahead.
I have a question. So you point to all these references in your texts, these are ancient texts about climate and justice. Why do we only see a major push for it in the last 20 years, and not a continual push since the 5th century?
I briefly addressed that in my opening. Most of scripture was written for a very different context than the one in which we live. I mean, can you imagine living in an entire world, no cars, no fossil fuel availability, no running water. And so the script has flipped, right? For most of human history, human beings really had to spend most of each and every day that they lived looking for calories, looking for enough heat to survive, spinning and weaving and gathering things for clothing and things like that. And the Industrial Revolution, our economic advantage, our ability to feed ourselves and worry about having too many calories every day. I mean, that is a blip in human history. I think that's the reason why. I mean, our life of faith, our life together, our willingness to encounter the holy and to work together is to address the issues of the day. And so it's only been the case that we've had a master. I mean, the United States made its national capital on a swamp. Now that tells you about the attitude of the people that settled this nation. We thought we could master a swamp. So we built our capital on it. That's crazy. And so it's only been in the context of modernity, really, that we've had the ability to overcome nature and destroy it, basically. The question, before that was, how can we keep nature from destroying us? So I think that's the reason. It's just become a need since we've gained that capacity.
I was going to say, in terms of your time frame too, like keep in mind that the tremendous expansion of the use of particularly fossil fuels. 1954 is probably time we'll begin statistically being able to measure its influence. So I was thinking about climate fluctuation, climate change. I'll go ahead and use it. Not supposed to use that term anymore. But climate change, the word coming out of the 50s, early 60s. So it's thoughts on it have been around and we're talking 70 years. It's not like all of a sudden we discovered it in 1999. It goes back a lot longer. I know from personal experience back in the 1980s, they were holding international conferences on the problem. So it's an important thing to recognize it's not a new problem. That's why I say getting out and educating people the severity of the problem is really at the top of the situation.
Excuse me, you done?
Oh, I was going to throw out another question.
Go right ahead.
Oh, I was going to throw out a question here is show of hands, how many people think we're going to say, for instance, find a technology that's going to somehow correct the problem?
No,
Oh,
you guys aren't trying to find that technology right now?
I'll feel
Prior to the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, there were plenty of ways we could harm the planet, but nothing specific, nothing on the scale we're able to do since then.
Right.
So climate in particular was not an issue, except for the normal variations and an earlier period known as the Little Ice Age, where it was too cold for water. In fact, climate change from fossil fuels in industry generally was discovered more than 100 years ago. But it didn't get a lot of traction right away. And I'd say it had to get worse before it registered with a lot of people. I was a participant in the very first Earth Day. I was a freshman in college at the time. And the concerns then, this has a lot to do with just what was being written and talked about. Big concerns were overpopulation. Of course, the population has grown enormously since then. And garbage. And those are still concerns, but now they're swamped by climate because we finally cottoned on to what has happened.
All right. I want to ask one last question and then allow you all to address any other concerns that you have that you didn't have the opportunity to share already. So the last question is just how your religion or your church specifically has gone green, and then what strides you're seeing or what strides you hope to see in like future ways that you're going to go green.
I'll see my time because I already addressed that in my comments.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we've gone pretty much the same way, get our electricity. And, from solar farm, but a small building, a small church, it's used a couple of days a week. So it didn't pay to put our own panels on the roof. We considered it, but it just wasn't cost effective. So we've done the solar thing that we did for a long time, try to maintain a small vegetable garden. And groundhogs and rabbits and kids all growing up from weeding it. And then we haven't done it recently, but they grow foods in the food bank or things like that. So it's one of the things we try to reduce. We don't use paper. Most of the time, we don't use paper plates. You know, bring that back. There's always someone who's educated about that. And we have our water is on-demand water, so we don't have a lot of water tank or anything. The toilets we installed are low flush, dual flush type toilet. Working very hard to try to get the plastic out of the can. So we keep working at it. And then put that with that.
Yeah, all that. You know, we again, I talked a little bit about the challenges when you've got a 150-year-old massive building to try to transition as much of that over as you can. And we've been working on that. We use regular dishes and put them in the dishwasher rather than disposables. We purchase our energy from the solar farm. So we're busy with all of that stuff, but we also talk constantly as a congregation about how in our own lives we can reduce our carbon footprint and be better partners with the rest of the planet. So we have educational programs after church on a regular basis, and I'd say probably a dozen of them a year are specifically related to our climate justice program.
Congregation Colony. We, several years ago now, before I retired, we installed heat pumps for all the rooms that are in frequent use, offices that are open every day, meeting rooms that are used throughout the week and so on. We did not do them in the main sanctuary and the social hall, because those are used at most 24 hours a week. And during the summer, generally not. We do, you know, we control our chapel, which is enough for summer attendance. We had switched years ago from using disposable tableware to permanent things that had to be washed. And then as we came out of the pandemic, and we were slow to resume activities, but when we did, for about a year, we resumed using disposables because people were so afraid of everything. But we've now switched back and got used to the idea that, say, after a service on Friday night where you've used 24 wine glasses and practically nothing else, someone could just wash them.
And I will speak to one thing. The other thing we do is we try to make sure our building is actually used and not just sitting there. And it's a headache, let me tell you. Sharing space, whew, administrivia, but it's important, so we do it.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to allow you all the time to make any last comments that I know you guys came prepared with some ideas. So I want to allow you guys this time to share anything else you have left that you didn't get to touch on. And so yeah, if any of you want to start. I know Frank, you came with some statistics if you didn't have the opportunity to share them all.
I looked up some stuff to get an idea. Now these are free the last summer. We had a fair weather problem. To find out where we stood in terms of groups. And I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of a lot of statistics because there's all kinds of them. But when people are questioned about, religious groups are questioned about, do they accept climate change as a major problem and human generated? I found it very interesting that this is for U.S. citizens. It's a major problem that we're facing. All U.S. adults, a little 50%, 53%, I say this figure has probably changed a little bit. Atheists, 90%. Christians, 45%. It's a major problem in the press, period. And as you go down through the religious commitment people have for, I found out that the highest commitment to their religion, about 39%. You realize this is, of course, mimicking a lot of our political people as well. So evangelical Christians, only 32% mimic that. The important thing I try to make is that we need to, particularly for Christians, really get on and get going and try to get the message out there.
I think my final comment would be a lot of people, and not just young people, a lot of people walk away from the religions of their childhood and youth because they find things in them that they can no longer stomach, that no longer work for them. Good that those folks walk away from those traditions, but don't let the idea that there is a single way of believing stop you from pursuing a holy mystery, however you may pursue holy mystery, however you may frame it, whether that is walking alone through the woods or walking in a faith-based community that is of any tradition. You will find someone who shares your core values, who will challenge you, and who will pull out the best in you if you just are patient and look for it. Again, each of our traditions in their own way is a little bit of a refugee tradition. Folks come to us because of the places they didn't pick. Very few birthright United Church of Christ members in my congregation. Almost everybody was something else before they were with us. Thank you.
I would support your comments and pointing out the Unitarian part of the book. I think right now there's only one member of a group that grew up as a Unitarian. Everyone else is one looking for other direction. So out there, there's all kinds of opportunities.
I would say that in our congregation, a quarter of the members were not Jewish by birth. A few have converted to Judaism when they married. Many others married a Jew and joined the congregation without converting. We don't actually require that for a married couple of one is Jewish. But there are also a good many who were just moved to it spontaneously, sometimes for reasons that they cannot totally explain, but they felt that it was right. It happens that our congregation is unaffiliated, which means that it's not aligned with any of the major denomination of Judaism, which means that technically everyone is a refugee from somewhere else. And it's very common in Judaism, even in the major denominations, to find people switching from conservative to reform, from Orthodox to conservative to reform to Orthodox, according to what they understand their needs and values.
I think I'll come at it from a slightly different angle. I don't know, when I look out at people that I've known over the years that have done this kind of hard work, advocacy work, fighting for climate change, fighting for peace and justice. If you're motivated by fear, you'll burn out. If you're motivated by love, yeah, you'll go through pauses, you'll go through ups and downs and everything, but the motivation just makes all the difference. And it's the love motivation that I think connects to your faith journey. So, if you grew up in a house of worship where you gained access to holy mystery, connection with other people, a sense of, okay, we're called forth to step into this, and it's empowering you to step into love, whatever that next step is, there's no reason to leave it. If it doesn't, there are plenty out there. The point is, when it comes to climate, you guys have a lot of work ahead of you, and it could be exhausting and lead to burnout. And so it is some kind of a faith that there is a being that is love itself, that you have access to alongside of other people that you can touch and see and smell and work with, that will take you a pathway of not toward burnout, but towards being the people that you need to be in the world. So that's how I would come at it. It's good to see your faces here.
I want to thank you all for coming. I think that kind of wraps it up, unless you all have anything else to add. Yeah. Just make sure you all sign in on the sign-in sheet. I also want to let you all know there is papers up here that can tell you more about the climate teach-in and the climate crisis and justice, things that you can watch to teach about it, things that you can do, and things that help you stay informed about climate change and like what's going on. It also has stuff to volunteer. So I can pass these around, or you guys can just come up and get them. Yeah, thank you.
And I know that the synagogue does too. The synagogue in our church has an enormous annual rubbish sale. So, and that's like a climate change thing. People can come get really good stuff that's recycled. So I don't know if you have any kind of way, like, should I get my person who runs our rubbish sale to let you guys know, so you can let your students know?
I can write the information down for you.